Hi, welcome to episode 14 of the Sell with a Story podcast. I'm Paul Smith.
Paul is a keynote speaker, leadership and storytelling trainer, and best-selling author of the books Lead with a Story, Parenting with a Story, and Sell with a Story.
Now, if you're paying attention, you should notice that you can actually see me instead of just hear me. I'm obviously doing some experimenting with the format of the podcast, so if you prefer the video over the audio-only format, let me know that. And if you just find it all to be a distraction, let me know that too. Okay, first, a little housekeeping. Due to some technical problems, this podcast was temporarily deleted on iTunes. Now, it's back on now, but any of you who were subscribed on iTunes might need to renew your subscription. So I'd ask that you go do that if you need to. Also, all the ratings and reviews were unfortunately lost as well, and that's one of the things people use to decide if they want to subscribe. So if you're so inclined, I'd very much appreciate it if you'd go to iTunes and leave a review and a rating. Okay, on to today's topic. As you know, this entire podcast series is dedicated to helping you tell better sales stories. But your first objective in a sales call shouldn't be to tell a better story. It should be to get the buyer to tell you their stories. If you don't hear their stories first, how are you going to know which of your stories to tell? You wouldn't trust a doctor who wrote you a prescription without listening to you explain your problem, would you? Well, of course not. Then why would a buyer accept the recommendation of a salesperson who did the same thing? And by the way, if you're unsure about what kind of stories you should want to hear from your prospects, here are the three most productive ones you should be asking for. 1, a personal story, so you can get to know them better. All right, 2, a story about their biggest problem, so that you'll know what kind of help they need. And 3, a story about how their favorite supplier became their favorite supplier, so you can become their favorite supplier. Okay, back to how. Now, getting your buyers to talk is easy. Getting them to tell stories requires a little more work. And you should want them to actually tell you stories, not just talk. And for many of the same reasons why you should be telling stories to them. A, it'll help you relax and listen better. B, it'll help you build a stronger relationship with them. And C, it'll help you better remember what they say. And when the story they tell is about the problem they're facing, it helps you understand the context so you'll have a better idea of the problem or opportunity you're up against. So, here are 5 tactics being used by successful salespeople to get their buyers to tell stories. All right, number 1, shut up and listen. Now, that's probably the most obvious but underutilized tactic to get stories out of buyers. Human beings abhor silence in a conversation like nature abhors a vacuum. We're desperate to fill the void with something. So if you can resist the temptation for that something to be your voice, you have a near certain chance that something being the buyer's voice. All right, number 2, ask open-ended questions instead of closed-ended questions. For example, what's your number 1 problem area right now? Is a closed-ended question. The answer would be given in the form of a word or two like inventory or warehousing. Now compare that to an open-ended question like this. How did you find out that your biggest problem was your biggest problem? That question is more likely to elicit a story. Oh, that would have been last month when our biggest customer placed an emergency order and we couldn't find the parts they needed in the warehouse, so we scheduled a special production run and expedited the parts to them at a huge expense. Well, then we ended up finding the parts they needed in the warehouse right where they should have been all along. You see, now you really know the problem you're up against. All right, number 3, ask about specific events in time. For example, tell me about how you ended up in your current job or what led up to losing your last major customer. You see how it would be impossible to answer those questions without telling a story. All right, number 4, use problem prompts. That means ask about specific problems you think your prospects might have with their current supplier. For example, if you ask, have you ever noticed your internet slows down after dinner? Your prospect is likely to launch into a story about the last time their internet connection slowed down after dinner. All right, and finally, number 5, if all else fails, tell your stories first. If you want buyers to tell personal stories about where they grew up, you tell a personal story about where you grew up. If you want them to tell a story about a problem they're having with their computer, you tell a story about a problem you're having with your computer. And you know this works because it works on you. When people tell you a story, the most likely thing that's running through your head is, hey, something like that happened to me once. And now you can't wait to tell them about it. Just remember, when the buyer interrupts and starts telling you her story, refer back to tactic number 1. Shut up and listen. So, here's your homework for the next sales call. 1. Create a list of open-ended questions to elicit the stories you want your buyer to tell you. All right, take that list of questions with you and make sure to ask them. All right, number 2, come up with your own examples of those kind of stories. That way, if you're having trouble getting the buyer to tell you the kind of story you're looking for, you can tell your story to prompt them. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. There's a whole chapter in my book, Sell with a Story, that goes into this topic deeper if you'd like to explore that. And you can find me at leadwithastory.com, where you can learn more about how I can help your leaders and salespeople be more effective through storytelling. Please join me next time, and we'll make better salespeople, one story at a time.